Good evening. We have been asked to talk about Auroville and the Matrimandir. So I have to give you a brief background on my experience. It was in New York State, in a blizzard. I was driving, and two ladies had stalled their car perpendicular to my car, coming down this huge hill. There was no way to get around them, and I hit them. And my wife went through the windshield. She was terribly scarred up. We wrote to Mother. Mother said there will be no scars. And at that moment when I got that message, I was guided to go out and get vitamin E capsules, break them open and put them all over her scars. And she had no scars. So we recovered $3,000 to pay for the medical expenses. And I wrote to Mother, and I wrote, Mother, I want to send you the $3,000. You have saved her life. And Mother wrote back, why don't you use the money to come for the inauguration of Auroville? Each ticket was $1,500. So we arrived in the ashram, and Mother gave me permission to photograph the inauguration center, the inauguration celebration, where the two people would bring the soil up from the different nations. And I had an injury on my finger, so you can still see me in the photograph with my finger bandaged. It was a wonderful experience to photograph that all those hours. But then Mother asked to see us. Oh, you see, I met her 7 years earlier, in 1961, when I was 23 years old. And the meeting lasted almost 1 hour, alone with Mother. No champaklal, no secretaries, just Mother in her great chair and me at her feet. And she asked me, would you like to talk or would you like to meditate? Knowing nothing about meditation, I said, I'd like to meditate, Mother. And then Mother gave me an experience that I can't even hardly express today. And she turned my life upside down. I didn't know what to do anymore. But I was not powerful enough to stay in the ashram, not quiet enough. My vital was too restless. There were a series of letters to Mother, and then I left. But I never stopped working for her. I worked with the handmade paper department. I sent her 50 long-playing records of all the music, classical music she had not heard since she arrived for the second time in the ashram. So that's a little glimpse backwards. The thing that she wrote to me determined the rest of my life. I said, should I learn to conduct choirs, or should I continue with my vocal music studies? I had a scholarship for the Metropolitan Opera. And Mother wrote back, one or the other, because the important thing is not so much what you choose, but the spirit in which you will do it. And she wrote to me at the end of that, keep living in you the spirit of consecration, and all will be all right. What did I know about consecration? So now we fast forward to 1968. And Mother asked to see us. And a friend from California, at that time it was the East-West Cultural Center, and Jyoti Priya, Dr. Judith Tyberg, was in charge. Sri Aurobindo had given her her name, Jyoti Priya, lover of light. And Mother wrote to her, I can only quote the first by heart, but she said, to you who have realized your soul. And then Mother goes on to say that you are not complete until you can change everyone. Oh my God. And it was Jyoti Priya who originally I met after leaving a Pandit who was teaching me Raja Yoga. And the moment I met her in the East-West Cultural Center, she said, oh, but you are meant to go to Mother. So she wrote to Mother. And I had to send a sample of my handwriting along with my photograph. And a telegram comes back immediately. Tell him he may come and stay as long as he likes. Oh, what a blessing that was. I wasn't ready for it, but Mother gave me that invitation. So now it's 1968 and the inauguration of Auroville. And Mother asks to see us. There was a friend from that East-West Cultural Center. His name was Isidore. There was my wife, Annie, and myself. I came in first and sat on Mother's right. Annie sat in the middle, and this fellow sat on the left side. Mother greeted us all. She turned to Isidore, and she gave him this most radiant smile I've ever seen. And he was gone in 2 weeks. This yoga was not for him. Then she turns to Annie and she says, quote, this is not the first time we have met. You have been with me many times before. Many, many times. And then she turns to me and she says, you wouldn't like to come to Auroville in a few years? I feel you can do something there. I said, yes, Mother, whatever is your will. And that was our visit with Mother, our darshan of Mother that time. Mother said a few years. Well, Udar writes to me about a month later, and he says, Mother wants you to prepare to build the gardens of the Matrimandir. Wow. So I write back. I said, what does Mother want me to do? Go to college or do physical work with the company? Mother writes back, both. So I had to work during the day and go to college at night for horticultural courses. And then, very strangely, Mother sends another telegram. A biento. See you soon. Only 9 months later. And so, and he packed up. We got all our things sent off, and I came in December of 1969 to begin a nursery for the Matrimandir Gardens, the Matrimandir Gardens Nursery. Auroville in those days was a wasteland. I would meet with the conservators of forests, and they wrote that in 50 years, Auroville would be uninhabitable because all the topsoil in their fields was being washed into the canyons and down into the sea. And a man could not get 2 bags of peanuts out of an acre. How could he support a family? So I looked around, and very near the Matrimandir, where the Matrimandir would be, this is long before the Matrimandir started, and I saw a place with 12 mango trees and a canyon in the back. And I said, this is the place. I wrote to Mother, and Mother blessed it. And another fellow said, yes, I know that this is the place also. He is a Japanese boy who worked with me for many years. So we began the work. The most difficult work you could imagine. Blistering hot sun, well over 100 degrees. In May, I would stand before this imagination tree in full bloom, and I would pray to Mother. And yet, I didn't really have to pray to her. She made everything work. There was no electricity most of the time. It would be 102, 103 at night, and there was no electricity, so there was no fan. We would wring out a bed sheet and squeeze the water out. We would soak a bed sheet, squeeze the water out, and we could get 2 hours sleep usually. There were snakes all over the place. And Mother said, don't kill any snakes. Make friends with them, which I have done. I have a good relationship with snakes and birds, fortunately. And we had to go to a pump house to pump the water every night into the tanks in the nursery to be able to water the place. And there would be snakes on the path, vipers, kraits, and cobras. I never got bitten. I never interfered with them. I gave them their place, and they gave me mine. One time, though, 2 French people moved into the pump house, and the lady claimed that I was taking their water for their vegetable garden, and she called me a dog. Shen, right? That's the first time I was ever called a dog, but we would engage the young Tamil boys in the neighboring villages. And many of them grew up as landscapers. They knew the plants, they knew how to plant, because we worked side by side in that heat. And I had sunstroke about 4 times, but every time Mother came to the help. And so we began to collect plants from all over India and eventually all over the world. So by 1970, I had the nursery going, and from 70 to 72, I would send Mother flowers many times a week sometimes. And Tara Johar would take the flowers to Mother. I would stand by the samadhi and listen to Mother exclaim on their beauty. And I can tell you that today, that sustains me more than food. When she named one flower, Remembrance of Sri Aurobindo, another flower she named To Live Only for the Divine, another flower she named Joy of Union with the Divine. These are moments that you can express. And when I was in the States, going back now a few years, I wrote a long letter to Mother. And I said, Mother, I would like to send you all the new classical music that you haven't heard since you've been in the ashram. And I wrote all the different composers' names. I even sent her the Doors, and I sent her electronic music, and I sent her so many different things. And she wrote back with a big Sharpie pen, these I have heard almost everything they have written. It was Ravel and Debussy. And then she underlines all of these, and she says, these I have not heard at all. Well, I was working in a record shop, and so the manager of the shop was a true musicologist, and we chose together 50 records and sent them to Mother. Mother listened to one every day for 50 days. What a blessing. I can't express how much of a blessing. And then the excavation began for the Matrimandir. And I wrote to Mother and I said, Mother, shouldn't Aurovillians dig the hole? And Mother wrote back that it would be better if they did. But there were so few of us. There were only about 12 of us at that time. 12, 15 perhaps. And so many hundreds of hired workers came in. And there were fights and disagreements, but it was very difficult work, excavating that huge area to begin the footings. Well, many Aurovillians started to work on the construction of the Matrimandir. But we worked with the flowers, and they put us down. You people, you're just useless people, not doing anything. The Matrimandir is what Mother wrote back. The gardens are as important as the Matrimandir. And the gardens of La Grace will be as important as the buildings, which is why I ask your help in the future. So, at that time, many people were coming to help me. They are well-known personalities in Auroville today, and they wanted to work. Well, you should write to Mother and ask her permission. And Mother wrote back, I have the letter, to those who want to work in harmony and with goodwill, there is no need to ask my permission. So the work began in earnest, and it was very difficult work. Because in Auroville those days, all the villagers had young boys with their goats. And we could grow things, and in 1 month, the goats could wipe out in 1 hour. And so one day I caught one. And I said, I'm not giving it back unless you pay 25 rupees. And families came and villagers weeping and crying, please give it back, please give it back. I gave it back. And the next day the goats decimated our work again. This time I caught one, I said, no, I'm not giving it back. They paid me the 25 rupees, which was a lot of money in those days. And never again did we see a goat or a cow come into the nursery. So we had a beautiful working relationship with the village people. I know you'll hear different stories and how difficult it was. And yeah, sometimes there were villagers who were antagonistic towards Auroville. This was their land. And now I'm going to bring up something that I personally was involved with. There were two groups amongst the few of us who were there in Auroville. One group said, pay the villagers any amount of money they want. It's been their land for hundreds and hundreds of years. We have no right to ask a low price. And I was part of the other group. And I said, no, we should buy the land now, offer a reasonable amount, and get the land for all of Auroville. In those days, it was very cheap, very inexpensive. So I wrote to Mother. And Mother sent her son, Monsieur André, to meet us at the center in the area called Peace. And he said just this. Mother said, buy the land now. You do not know the power of greed. Now I will ask Sraddhalu to tell you some things about the importance of the Matrimandir to all of us. Because Mother has put such a force in that room, which she saw all the dimensions. She knew exactly the columns that had to be there. And then people said, no, we don't want columns. And Mother said, I saw the columns. And then I saw the white carpet, and I saw the dimensions of the room. Mother saw it all. She said, I saw nothing outside, but I saw that. So please.
Kirit Joshi once shared with us something that the mother said to him. She said, the 3 steps of my work: the center of education in the ashram, Auroville, India. Obviously giving you a broad line of the spread of her consciousness and work. The ashram itself, as you know, is a concentrated space created for the purpose of sadhana, of the concentrated spiritual development of consciousness, intended to grow all the way to the supramental and the rest of the journey in Sri Aurobindo's yoga. When the ashram and the work in the ashram had been sufficiently stabilized, the mother initiated the work of Auroville. taking the same broad realizations or objectives of the ashram, but in a more general but a larger context of an entire township, in which the goal was stated as a practical living human unity represented there on the scale of a township, where all cultures, all nationalities, all types of humanity could coexist in a common space, unified by the underlying spiritual principles that brought them together, because the spirit is the only framework within which the full diversity of humanity can be united. And there, on the scale of a township, a new way of life, a new economy, a new social framework, a new approach to education, a new media, a whole new way of living would be growing. And she was happy to use the word experimental where it needed, because there's a whole process of learning how the new consciousness can organize itself. There are no preconceived forms. It has to, so to say, shape its way and find its way, creating new forms. So the very first school which was opened in Auroville, she named Last School. You see what the message says? There's not going to be any more schools after this. You're just starting a school, well, that's the last school, no more schools. A radical shift in education. Okay, so after a while they had to make a second building and a new school. So they asked Mother for a name. Mother names it After School. There's a third school being built now. Again, Mother has asked for a name. Mother calls it No School. I see the trajectory for education that she has set. Of course, people have still not come up to that. But she has defined the standards and values. Well, we don't go too much into it. The whole economic structure of Auroville and working, she said, would be barter, no money exchange, etc. We're still a little way off from that. But at the center of this whole township, physically representing its spiritual aspiration and its soul, is the Matrimandir. Before Mother spoke of the Matrimandir or gave its details, there was one disciple of the Mother who saw it in a dream. That was Narad. So I'll ask Narad to share that and then I'll continue the story.
Mother told Navajata that she wanted us, Annie and myself, to have the first house built in Auroville. At the center called Peace. Well, that was an extraordinary thing, she said. I don't think Navajata wanted to build a house for two white people, but that's okay. And one day, this vision comes to me. And it's the vision of our house. It's in a circular form. And there's a lot of light, because at the center there's a hole through which light comes down. And then there are these 12 rooms. I don't remember what they were for, but I knew it was our home. And now I can use the phrase, our home for all of you. And the Matrimandir was built in that way. You wrote to the Mother about it? Or it was Hutta who wrote? Hutta wrote to Mother
Hutta
about
wrote.
it,
Yes. And I wanted to highlight this point because before Mother described the full form of it, it had already been created on the inner levels, and those who were sensitive could see and experience it. And this is true not only of the Matrimandir, but the whole of Auroville. It is also true of the La Grace Center, which is being created here, To the extent that the Divine Mother initiates it, she has already given to it a certain form and a certain force and a certain power of inspiration. And human receptivity tends to generally try to fit it into preconceived expectations, and that's our problem, not her problem. And so it was even with Auroville. She had already given to it a form which she described in great detail, but the architect had to bring in his own fanciful elements, and she had to manage the architect. And the same for Auroville. But when it came to the inner chamber of the Matrimandir, Mother said, I will not talk to the architect, I'll talk to the engineer. Now you know the difference. The architect wants to create. If you give him an agenda, if you describe something, he has to add his own spike, twist, element which is his. But the engineer is trained to execute with precision what is given to him. And so the whole inner chamber, Mother gave the design, the measurements and everything to the engineer directly. She was very particular about the precision of the sizes and details. But the Matrimandir itself represents the soul of Auroville and the aspiration and the divine presence established at the center of Auroville physically. Those of you who have been there, you know what it means, you know what it contains. And when Mother gave the instructions, she said, build Auroville and I take it upon myself to make it one of the most powerful centers in the world. She used, I think, powerful spiritual centers in the world, which she has done. She kept her promise. So it doesn't matter if she's in the body or not. The commitment she made then continues, and it will be the same for La Grace. If we make ourselves worthy of it, she will make it a center, a spiritual center. When the Matrimandir's construction itself, Mother had given many indications, even for the outer skin. There were a lot of passages of confusion with the architects, fancies, people, etc. Things that got stopped, that got blocked. And we saw in all this the continuing struggle between human limitations and the divine creative power, which is already and only blocked by human incapacities or confusions or conflicts, disharmonies. Well, eventually through all those decades that has been done, or Matrimandir has been completed, the gardens are still not completed though.
I'd like to talk about the gardens a little bit because it has been a traumatic experience in my life. I lived in Auroville for the first 12 years. And I established seed exchange programs with botanical gardens all over the world. People were so interested in Auroville. I gave a talk to the head and his entire team of the New York Botanic Garden, and they were ready to do anything. And so I collected thousands of plants, but the vision of the structure of the gardens never came to me. I labored over it. I thought about it. I worked with a fellow who did some paintings and things. Nothing worked. And I wrote to Mother, Mother, I am blank. I have no idea. Well, I left Auroville because of the severe troubles in 1981. And for 37 years, I suffered because I could not catch Mother's vision of the gardens. And one day, I spoke to my Upaguru, Aurobindo, who helped me get closer to Mother. And I said, look, I'm carrying this weight of this burden of guilt. And in a powerful voice, he said to me, get rid of it. The gardens are not yet ready to descend. We have to be ready to receive the gardens and let them manifest. And when we're not ready, we see what's happening now. There are 3 gardens finished, another one starting someplace, not consecutively. And it's extraordinary how Mother has named these gardens. Existence, consciousness, bliss, life, light, power. I mean, everything is there, only waiting for us to be the instruments to realize it physically.
She, of course, set a very high standard for the gardens. When you enter the garden of bliss, you should be able to experience bliss.
Yes, I should tell you what Mother said to me in another meeting when I met her. She said of the gardens, it must be a thing of beauty, of such a beauty that when men enter, they will experience physically and concretely the significance of each garden. In the garden of youth, they will know youth. In the garden of bliss, they will know bliss. I would never want to leave the garden of bliss. And she said, at the very end, she raised her right hand and she looked at me and she said, one has to know how to move from consciousness to consciousness.
So the completion of the Matrimandir, including the gardens, is extremely important because Mother said the sooner it is completed, the better it will be for Auroville. Because the soul represented concretely and manifested in matter is where it gets anchored, and its ripple effect is on the whole of Auroville's existence. And the powers that are represented, the 12 powers, both of the Mother's symbol and in the gardens, ripple out their influence on the whole of Auroville. But why Auroville? Not just as an experimental model township for the future, not just a center where human unity can be practically represented. Auroville becomes then a miniature world representing the future of humanity. If somewhere on earth, the different types of humanity and nationalities and civilizations and values and cultures can live in unity in a spiritual framework, container. If anywhere on earth this can be done, then the promise of human unity is certain. If this cannot be done even in a tiny place, you have no certainty that it will happen on earth. And if there is one place on earth where this unity could be represented and formed in a spiritual container, it would be in a space which has already the familiarity with the spirit in a civilizational context. It had to be in India. And Auroville itself was not just a piece of land. Mother said, okay, let's do it here because someone suggested it. Going back to the 1950s, there is this description given by Pranab, who was one of Mother's attendants. He would drive with the Mother. She would go on a drive on some days. They would drive towards the direction of Auroville. And at some point, Mother would ask for the car to stop. She would step out and she would look westward, which is now in the direction of Auroville. And she would stay there gazing for a long time. And Pranab asked her, what is it, Mother, every time you stop here and look there? And Mother said, one day there will be a great city here. She saw it. Yeah. And so Auroville was waiting to manifest. Its place was already chosen even as the seat of tapasya of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother had been chosen and prepared for going back a few millennia. And so Auroville's realization, however partially, is a promise for the whole earth and the seed through which there is the ripple effect on the whole of the earth. For Auroville's completion, the seed and the spiritual center is the Matrimandir, and its completion is as if the seed of the seed, the core of the seed, the DNA of the seed, the spiritual center. And that's why we have to recognize how important this is.
I don't know if I told you that when we were being put down because we were doing the gardens, Mary Helen, my companion at that time, wrote to Mother, and Mother wrote back, "The gardens are as important as the Matrimandir." And then she wrote again to Mother and said that she had a vision that the Auroville garden, and she meant the Matrimandir gardens because there were no gardens in Auroville at that time, should be in the Japanese way. And Mother replied, "Naturally, it will be in the Japanese way."
The present most important requirement for Auroville and its completion is the lands which were not taken in time, where the prices have shot up and the greed of politicians, bureaucrats creeping in, grabbing lands, will have the sad effect of cutting up parts of Auroville. And this needs to be prevented. There are many approaches required. Recently, there was an attempt for a highway to pass right through Auroville, and that has fortunately, I believe, been prevented, and it has been asked to divert around Auroville. And the bureaucrats, this is how they make money. They know where they are going to make the highway. They buy up the land there, and then the highway is declared, land prices shoot up 10 times overnight, and they sell it off and make money. They'd already bought their lands. The politicians had bought their lands. So to divert the highway was nearly impossible. Everything was resisting, but it has been done, hopefully. But a similar situation exists, human greed in the lands of Auroville, and we need to give this the necessary importance. In whatever way you feel yourself called to participate. And if you feel that call, at the very least, start making visits there. And perhaps at some point you will find yourself drawn to settle there and participate in this collective adventure. We need good people also, because the work is for humanity and it can only be done by people who already feel that alignment to the Spirit. And please do visit, if nothing else, and I'm sure many of you will settle and join in the work, whether living inside Auroville or outside, you will be part of Auroville.
My closing remarks are very simple and personal and joyous. As the Matrimandir chamber was being completed, the ramp was being built, but it was far from being built. It was just boards, and I had the honor of taking Champaklau and Narad one day to the chamber. And Champaklau said the force was so powerful he didn't want to leave. This is before it was completed. I took Aurobindo Basu also, and he felt the same thing. When you go there, it will change your life.
Question here. You corresponded so many times with Mother. Have you preserved all her letters, handwritten?
Yes, almost all of them, yes.
Good. La Grace here, maybe one place to display a few.
I didn't tell him anything. This is explanation.
I think it's a good place, so everybody could see it.
Yes, it should be.
Okay. Thank you.
Any question? Yes.
I just heard about, someone sent me the WhatsApp video about Auroville, and they're saying that there are no taxes, no salary, and people are very happy and all that, so is that true? It's a WhatsApp, so it could be wrong, but I'm not sure.
Oh, dear. What can I
It's a
say?
10-minute
So,
video.
some of them are very happy. Why? I don't know. Auroville is in an evolutionary crisis, just like the world. It has to be the repository of the new world so that it can be replicated in other countries, in other continents. So it's a long process, and it needs the collaboration of Aurovillians and people outside Auroville in love and harmony to become realized.
It's a beautiful video, whoever sent me
Next question. Yes.
The psychic being is the supramental within us. Is that correct?
No. The psychic being is the divine consciousness represented as an individual focus, which is evolving through these stages, developing these sheets through these gradations of consciousness, ascending to its supramental potentiality. Is not in itself supramental.
But I've understood that it's the three, once it's established itself through the layers of our being, then that is the new supramental being.
No. The psychicization, that is the psychic influence settling in these three layers of the being, is just that, the psychic influence settling there. The supramental is a vertical ascension of the gradations of consciousness, which the human, the psychic, journeys through to its realization. What it can do is, in creating the psychicized space, it builds a receptivity and aspiration that allows the supramental to increasingly manifest more and more directly.
But Mother said that she found the supramental at the very bottom of matter, at the very base.
At the very bottom of everything is the supramental, because it's the creative consciousness which builds the whole universe, including all the levels of consciousness. It's the source of it all. I think what you are describing is the mother's description of how the psychic being becoming manifested fully, materializing itself, will become the supramental body.
Yes,
That's
what
how
I
she
mean.
described the physical transformation.
And how is that going to happen?
That was the last few days.
Yeah, but see the point, the logic of it you have to understand. What in you is that which is most essentially divine? This is the psychic being. And when the psychic being takes on the materiality of matter, it would be as if divinity itself becoming the substance of matter.
Yes.
And that would be the transformed physicality. And that's something which has had no precedent in the history of the universe. So what form it will be, what it will actually be experienced as, is something to be realized in time. But you can of course speculate and get a sense of what it's like based on the other levels and the effect of the supramental in those levels.
I will quote you what Mother said exactly. At the very bottom of the inconscient, most hard and narrow and rigid and stifling, I struck upon an almighty spring that cast me up forthwith into a luminous vast, vibrating with the seeds of a new world.
Next.
I got one more question on what you just said, supramental. If that is a level of consciousness, and if it is that the same thing like they call Gunstan in Hindi? Meaning what level of consciousness it is, and if it is the same, how many Gunstans are there before, or what are the achievement levels? How do you know which gunstan you have achieved? Or can you measure the level of consciousness?
See, what you're describing as Gurusthan is just any position which can be seen as a Gurusthan. It is not a specific position. If you recall the description earlier this afternoon, where I described the gradations of consciousness ascending, the last being that supramental consciousness. So that is not something which is normally accessed by people, even in a high level of spirituality. But that is the Satchidananda concentrating in itself to release and deploy the whole universe. It's the creative status of the divine. When the divine becomes the creator, gathering all knowledge and power and conceiving in perfect detail all infinite possibilities, and then deploying that knowledge and power to become those infinite possibilities. That status is the
Omniscient knowledge.
This is the definition which we were speaking in the Veda, Chatushpad and Dvipad. So there is a mystery about psychic being. We, truly speaking, till the end do not know what it is. It's a delegate of unborn self in the midst of this creation. So this Dvipad view, actually its source is Anandamaya Purusha. It comes from the transcendental Satchitananda, from beyond the supramental, as it were. Though supramental itself is a projection of Satchitananda into this world. But it has totally different treatment. So it's a projection of the unborn self in the midst of our creation. Whereas the whole creation, physical, vital, mental, and supramental, builds up this manifestation in all possible relations. So the psychic is that element which will be representing the supreme in the individual form. Unbelievable thing. If you think of it, the supreme in the individual form, in all possible relations with other supremes. But to provide it, the supramental environment is needed. The Satchitananda manifested in this time and space is needed, and that's what Supermind is providing. Am I right?
Very simply, I have understood from Mother, the soul is eternal. The psychic being is the evolving soul.
Yes.
Where in all of this range between being human and supramental and all that was Sri Aurobindo?
In that early phase of Sri Aurobindo's sadhana, he rose all the way to the supramental consciousness. All that he wrote was from his direct experience. Subsequently, the work was to establish the supramental consciousness into the mind, vital, and the physical body, transforming them into its terms. This work was done in his body and in Mother's body, in the full transformation of the mind, the full transformation of the vital, and even the transformation of what he calls the subtle physical. That's the part closest to this physical density. And all of these were supramentally transformed. These are the only two people we know in whom this work was done to this degree. The last step of taking it into the most dense part of the material body was what was remaining, at which point at this level it connects into the larger humanity. And if there is the receptive base of humanity to support, that work could be done. But with that support not being sufficient, that part of the work was left incomplete. And again, there's a caveat to that. Sri Aurobindo explained that if they had to do it for themselves in their own bodies individually, they would have finished it long ago. But because their goal was to imprint their realization into humanity, so that it will help others who can do the same thereafter, therefore they had to connect themselves to humanity, and at that level, human acceptance or support was necessary. Otherwise, it would not have been an issue.
And for 23 years after Sri Aurobindo left his body, Mother worked on the cellular consciousness, transforming the cells of her own body, which being transformed, she said, by a vast contagion, would go into all those who are open